It was a calm morning in the hills just outside Asheville. Birds chirped in the distance, and the sun peeked through thin clouds, casting soft light over the open fields. Ellie, a 10-year-old girl with messy blonde hair and dirt-smudged jeans, tossed a ball to Max, her German shepherd. He caught it midair, landing gracefully on all fours before running back to her, with pride shining in his eyes. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, a shadow that followed her everywhere, and a best friend who never left her side. The day felt normal, even peaceful, but something in the air felt off. Around noon, the wind picked up. Trees swayed harder than usual, and clouds rolled in darker and faster than anyone expected. Ellie's dad came out onto the porch with a worried look on his face. "Storm's moving in quick," he said, glancing up at the sky. "Help me tie down the chairs." As they rushed to secure everything in the yard, Max stayed near the edge of the woods, alert. He always watched the tree line, as if he saw things no one else could. Ellie whistled for him to come back to the porch, but he stood still, ears perked, eyes focused. By 3 p.m., the sky had turned a deep gray. The wind howled louder, pushing against the house and tearing leaves from branches. Thunder rumbled in the distance, followed by flashes of lightning that lit up the sky like camera flashes. Ellie, now inside with her parents, peeked out the window. "Where's Max?" she asked. Her dad looked but didn't answer. Max wasn't on the porch. The rain came down in sheets. It was hard to see anything beyond the glass. A few minutes later, a loud, cracking boom echoed through the valley, followed by a heavy crash that shook the house. Ellie jumped. Her mom gripped her hand. "It's just a tree," her dad said, trying to sound calm, though his eyes stayed fixed on the window. When the storm finally began to pass, the world outside looked different. Branches littered the ground. A flower had been torn apart by wind. The backyard was unrecognizable. Ellie didn't wait for permission. She grabbed her raincoat, ran out the back door, and started calling for Max. Her voice echoed, but no bark came back. That's when she saw it, near the edge of the woods. A massive oak tree, splintered and fallen, lay on its side, and Max was nowhere in sight. Ellie's heart raced as she rushed toward the fallen oak tree. Her eyes darted around the yard, scanning every inch of the yard for any sign of Max. She called out again, her voice trembling. "Max, come here, boy." There was no response, no familiar sound of his paws running to meet her. Her father appeared behind her, his face pale. "He's not in the yard?" he asked, looking around in disbelief. Ellie shook her head, her hands gripping the soaked fabric of her raincoat. The wind had died down, but the rain was relentless, soaking through her clothes. Ellie didn't wait for any instructions. She ran toward the edge of the woods, her boots sinking in the mud with every step. The trees that had once looked so beautiful now seemed ominous, their twisted branches casting long, dark shadows across the ground. Her mind raced as panic set in. What if Max had run too far? What if he was lost in the woods, hurt or worse? She called his name again, her voice more desperate this time. "Max, come on, boy. Where are you?" The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the steady patter of the rain and the occasional rustle of the wind pushing through the trees. As she reached the edge of the woods, her heart skipped a beat when she saw something glinting in the wet grass. It was Max's leash, the blue nylon rope she always used when they went for walks in the neighborhood. Her breath caught in her throat. She crouched down, her fingers brushing the leash gently. "Max," she cried out again, her voice breaking as she stood up and glanced around frantically. And then, through the heavy mist and the blur of rain, she heard it, a faint whimper, barely audible over the storm. Ellie froze, her eyes wide with hope. "Max," she whispered, taking slow, careful steps toward the sound. The whimper came again, followed by a soft, pitiful bark. Ellie's pulse quickened as she sprinted toward the sound, her breath shallow in her chest. She pushed through the wet branches, her eyes scanning the ground beneath her. That's when she saw him. Max, lying beneath the heavy trunk of the fallen tree, his body twisted awkwardly. His back leg was trapped, pinned by the massive weight of the oak. Max lifted his head when he saw Ellie, his eyes locking with hers. Despite the pain, his tail gave a small, slow wag. He didn't bark or struggle. Instead, he lay still, calm, and waiting for her to come to him. Ellie's heart ached as she knelt beside Max, her hands trembling as she reached out to gently stroke his fur. His eyes locked onto hers, filled with a quiet strength. Despite being pinned under the massive weight of the fallen tree, Max didn't whimper or growl. Instead, he remained calm, his breathing steady, as though he understood that help was on the way. "Max," Ellie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She carefully ran her fingers through his wet fur, trying to comfort him in a way that felt so inadequate. His tail wagged just slightly, as if assuring her that he was okay, even though she knew he was in pain. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking. Max shifted his body a little, attempting to find a more comfortable position, but the heavy trunk only pressed harder on his leg. Ellie could see the strain in his eyes, but still, he didn't bark out in pain. He trusted her. He trusted that everything would be okay. Ellie stood up, wiping the tears that had unknowingly begun to fall. "Dad," she yelled, her voice loud with desperation. "Dad, come quick." Within moments, her father appeared through the rain-soaked trees, his face a mixture of concern and determination. "Ellie, where is he?" he called out, looking frantically around. Ellie pointed to the fallen tree, her voice barely audible over the steady patter of the rain. "He's here, under the tree. His leg is trapped. We need to help him." Her dad rushed over, kneeling beside Max with a look of shock on his face. His usual calm demeanor seemed to crack for a moment. "Max," he muttered softly, his hand resting on the dog's head. "We're gonna get you out of here." Ellie's father quickly pulled out his phone and dialed for help, his voice steady but urgent as he spoke to the emergency services. "We need assistance right now. A tree has fallen and my dog's leg is pinned. We need help fast." While they waited for help to arrive, Ellie kept her focus on Max, not leaving his side. She stroked his head, whispering to him softly, telling him everything would be okay. Max remained still, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no fear in his gaze, only a quiet understanding, as if he knew that they wouldn't leave him behind. Ellie's father hung up the phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're sending someone over now," he said, trying to reassure Ellie as he rubbed her shoulder gently. But Ellie could see the worry in his eyes. The weight of the tree was too much for just the two of them to lift. Max's leg was pinned in such a way that moving him could cause even more harm. Ellie knelt beside Max again, her hands trembling as she reached out to stroke his fur. Max's eyes flicked to her face, and once again, his tail gave a slow, reassuring wag. Ellie smiled weakly through her tears. Max wasn't scared. Max trusted her. It was as though he believed everything would be fine, even though the situation seemed so hopeless. As the minutes stretched on, the rain continued to fall, turning the ground into a muddy mess. Ellie felt the cold creeping through her raincoat, but it was nothing compared to the cold feeling settling in her chest. She wanted to do more for Max, anything, but she was helpless. It wasn't long before the sound of chainsaws and shouting voices echoed in the distance. Ellie's head snapped up and her heart skipped a beat. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers had gathered to help. People from nearby farms and homes were arriving, all with one goal: to free Max. "Where is he?" one of the neighbors called out as he pushed through the wet brush. Ellie pointed to Max, and the group rushed over, moving with a sense of urgency. They worked quickly to assess the situation. One of the men from down the road was an experienced tree feller, and he immediately began strategizing how to move the fallen tree without hurting Max further. Ellie stood back, watching as the group worked together with calm efficiency. It was incredible how quickly the community came together, offering tools, expertise, and even a few comforting words. Even the children, who had been watching from a distance, offered their help in their own way, bringing blankets and food for those working on the rescue. Max, though still trapped, remained calm. His eyes never left Ellie. It was as if he knew that help had arrived and that soon he would be safe again. Ellie couldn't stop her tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. She didn't realize just how much Max meant to the community until she saw how they rallied around him, ready to do whatever it took to bring him home. The group gathered around the fallen tree, each person focused on the task ahead. The enormous oak tree was a formidable obstacle, but they were determined to free Max. The heavy trunk had to be moved carefully, inch by inch, so that Max wouldn't be injured any further. One wrong move could make things worse, but the community worked together with a quiet sense of purpose. Ellie stood off to the side, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she watched. She couldn't bear to leave Max's side for too long, but she also knew she couldn't do much to help. Instead, she whispered soft words of encouragement to him, hoping he could hear her through the chaos. "Stay with us, buddy," Ellie said, wiping her wet face. Max's eyes flicked to her, and though he was still pinned beneath the massive weight of the tree, his gaze was steady. He didn't seem afraid. He didn't seem to doubt for a second that they would save him. The man with the chainsaw moved in first, carefully slicing through the smaller branches that were tangled around Max's body. Every cut was calculated and precise, ensuring that nothing would fall onto the dog's injured leg. The sound of the chainsaw slicing through wood was loud in the stillness, but it was a necessary sound, a sign that progress was being made. Another neighbor, a woman from a few streets over, approached with a rope. She tied one end securely around the base of the tree, while others began pulling on it with all their strength. The tree shifted slightly, groaning under the strain, but still, Max remained still. He didn't move a muscle, even when the tree creaked ominously above him. Ellie held her breath as the team of rescuers worked in tandem, pulling and lifting with every ounce of strength they had. There was a rhythm to their movements, a shared understanding that this was no ordinary rescue. It was a mission to save someone who had always been there for them. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, but then, finally, there was a crack. The tree shifted. Slowly, with great care, they managed to lift it enough so that Max's leg was no longer trapped under the weight. He let out a soft whine, the first sound he had made in what felt like forever. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him once more. Max's leg was bruised, but it wasn't broken. Ellie carefully touched his side, looking into his eyes, her breath catching in her throat. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of relief. Max lifted his head and gave her a soft nudge, as if to say, "I knew you would." Max was finally free, but the relief was tempered by the sight of his injured leg. The team of rescuers stood around, breathing heavily, each person glancing at Max with concern. Ellie stayed close, her fingers gently stroking the top of Max's head, trying to keep him calm. His body was scratched and covered in mud, but his spirit was unbroken. Despite everything, Max was still the brave, loyal dog he had always been. Ellie's father knelt beside him, checking the injury carefully. "It looks like a bad bruise, but I don't think it's broken," he said, though his voice was tight with worry. "We need to get him to the vet, just to be sure." Max, ever the patient soul, didn't flinch. He looked up at Ellie with a steady gaze, his tail wagging weakly. It was as though he understood what was happening and was trusting her to take care of him, just as he had always done for her. As Ellie and her father made their way to the car, carrying Max carefully to avoid further strain on his leg, the neighbors who had helped them rescue Max stayed behind, their faces filled with quiet satisfaction. They had worked together, not as strangers, but as a community bound by love and respect for the dog who had watched over them all. The short drive to the vet was filled with a heavy silence. Ellie kept one hand on Max's head, feeling the slight warmth of his fur beneath her fingertips. She could tell he was exhausted, but still, he rested his head on her lap, trusting her to lead him through this. The bond between them was undeniable, a bond that only grew stronger in times of hardship. At the vet's office, the staff quickly took Max in for an assessment. They cleaned his wounds, took x-rays of his leg, and confirmed what Ellie's father had suspected. It was a severe bruise, but nothing that would require surgery. Max would need rest and possibly a cast to help with the healing process. The doctor reassured them that Max would be back on his feet in no time. Throughout the entire visit, Max never made a sound, not even a whimper. He was a silent hero in his own right, stoic and strong, carrying on as though nothing had ever happened. Ellie watched him closely, her heart full of gratitude. Max wasn't just a dog. He was family, and nothing would ever change that. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet moments, healing, and visits from friends and neighbors. Max, still wearing his cast, stayed by Ellie's side every day, resting and recovering in the comfort of their home. His once strong and energetic gait was replaced by slow, cautious steps, but his spirit never wavered. Ellie was there for him every step of the way. She made sure to follow the vet's instructions, giving Max his medication on time, keeping him as comfortable as possible, and taking him outside for short walks in the yard. Though he was slower now, Max still insisted on being near Ellie, always following her from room to room, watching her with the same devoted eyes he'd had when he was healthy. Every morning, Ellie would sit beside Max on the couch, brushing his fur softly as she talked to him about her day. She told him stories about the kids at school, about the weather, and sometimes about the things that made her sad. Max always listened attentively, his head resting on her lap as if to say, "I'm here for you." The community's love for Max was evident. Children from the neighborhood dropped by to visit him, bringing treats and toys. Some even made colorful cards, drawing pictures of Max with a big happy smile on his face. Ellie kept each card in a special box beside his bed, a reminder of the bond between them all. Max, despite his injury, remained the heart of the town, silent, strong, and unwavering. As the days passed, Max's leg healed steadily. The bruising faded, and the vet's checkups confirmed that he was recovering well. But more than his physical healing, it was the emotional bond between Max and Ellie that was growing stronger than ever. He was her protector, her confidant, and now, more than ever, her hero. One afternoon, Ellie's father came into the living room with a big smile on his face. "Guess what?" he said, holding out a leash. Ellie's heart leaped in her chest. "Is it time?" she asked eagerly. "It's time," her father replied, grinning. "Max is ready for his first walk in a month." Max, though still limping slightly, perked up at the sound of the leash. He stood up, his tail wagging slowly, and looked at Ellie with those familiar eyes. He was still recovering, but there was a spark in him, a spark that hadn't dimmed through all the pain. He was ready, not just for the walk, but for the next chapter in his life. Max's first walk after his recovery was nothing short of a triumph. Though his steps were slow at first, Ellie could see the familiar strength returning with every step. His limp was almost gone, and with each stride, he seemed to regain more of his old confidence. Ellie smiled to herself as she walked beside him, her heart swelling with pride. Max had been through so much, but here he was, showing the world what true resilience looked like. The two of them made their way down the familiar path through the woods, the same path they had walked together countless times before. The air was crisp and cool, the leaves crunching underfoot as they moved in sync. Max's nose twitched, sniffing at the scents of the forest, and Ellie couldn't help but laugh when he stopped to chase a squirrel of a tree, his tail wagging wildly, despite his previous injury. It was clear that Max wasn't just recovering physically, he was reclaiming his spirit. The bond between them had only deepened over the past weeks, forged through adversity and love. Ellie had always known Max was special, but now she understood just how deeply their connection ran. He wasn't just her dog, he was her family, her protector, and her best friend. As they reached the edge of the woods, Ellie stopped and looked down at Max, who was sitting beside her, looking up at her with those knowing eyes. For a moment, they just stood there, enjoying the quiet peace that surrounded them. Ellie reached down, resting her hand on Max's head, feeling the warmth of his fur under her fingers. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she whispered softly, her voice full of emotion. Max responded by leaning into her, nudging her hand with his nose as if to say, "You don't have to." And in that moment, Ellie knew that no matter what came their way in the future, they would face it together. The bond they shared couldn't be broken by anything, no storm, no injury, no fear. It was a bond built on love, trust, and loyalty, and it would last forever. As they made their way back home, Max walked with renewed energy, his head held high. Ellie knew that the road ahead might have its challenges, but with Max by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they had overcome the impossible, and nothing could stand in their way now.